What happens when one of music's most beloved icons sits down for what should be a friendly chat, only to discover the host has a completely different agenda? What you're about to witness is perhaps the most uncomfortable television moment in recent memory, where a simple interview spiraled into something nobody saw coming. The tension was so thick, you could cut it with a knife, and by the end, security had to step in. This is the story of how a routine late-night appearance turned into an absolute disaster that left everyone in the studio speechless. Dive into this incredible story. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really happened here. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single detail of this unbelievable encounter. It was supposed to be just another typical evening on The Late Show. Elton John had agreed to appear as a guest to promote his farewell tour, something that should have been a celebration of his incredible career spanning over 5 decades. The audience was buzzing with excitement as they waited for the legendary performer to take the stage. Little did they know, they were about to witness television history for all the wrong reasons. Stephen Colbert walked out to his usual warm reception, flashing that trademark smile that had made him a household name. He seemed relaxed, maybe even a bit too relaxed for what was coming. As he delivered his opening monologue, there were subtle hints that something might be different about tonight's show. His jokes felt a bit sharper, his timing slightly more aggressive than usual. The studio audience laughed along completely, unaware that their host had apparently decided to abandon his usual approach for something much more confrontational. When it came time to introduce his guest, Colbert's tone shifted almost imperceptibly. Instead of the glowing introduction audiences expected for a music legend, there was something cold in his voice as he announced Elton John. The camera cut to the legendary singer making his entrance, resplendent in one of his signature colorful outfits, complete with sparkling glasses that caught the studio lights perfectly. He waved to the cheering crowd with genuine warmth, seemingly oblivious to the trap that was waiting for him just a few feet away. Elton settled into the guest chair with the ease of someone who had done thousands of interviews over the years. He adjusted his famous glasses and smiled broadly at Colbert, clearly expecting the kind of respectful conversation he was accustomed to receiving from late-night hosts. The audience was still riding high on the excitement of seeing such an icon. In person, their applause finally dying down as they prepared to hear stories from one of music's greatest treasures. But instead of the usual softball questions about tour dates and career highlights, Colbert opened with something that immediately changed the entire atmosphere in the room. His first question wasn't about music at all. Instead, he launched into a pointed inquiry about Elton's past statements regarding industry politics, framing it in a way that seemed designed to put the singer on the defensive right from the start. The smile on Elton's face faltered for just a moment before he attempted to deflect with humor, clearly hoping this was just an awkward opening that would quickly move into more comfortable territory. But Colbert wasn't having it. He pressed forward with a follow-up question that was even more aggressive than the first, his tone becoming noticeably sharper as he challenged statements Elton had made years earlier in completely different contexts. You could see the confusion starting to creep across Elton's face as he realized this wasn't going to be the friendly chat he had signed up for. The audience began to sense something was off too, their laughter becoming more nervous and uncertain as the exchange continued. What should have been a celebration of an incredible career was turning into something much more uncomfortable. And everyone in the studio could feel the tension building with each passing moment. Colbert seemed to be feeding off this discomfort, his questions becoming increasingly personal and confrontational. He brought up old controversies that had been settled years ago, presenting them as if they were current scandals that demanded immediate explanation. Elton tried his best to maintain his composure, answering each question with the grace and professionalism that had served him well throughout his career. But you could see the frustration beginning to build behind those famous glasses. The breaking point was still coming, but already the foundation was being laid for what would become one of the most shocking moments in late-night television history. The audience had no idea they were watching the calm before an absolutely devastating storm. The studio lights seemed to grow hotter as Colbert doubled down on his aggressive approach, completely abandoning any pretense of this being a normal interview. His next question cut even deeper, bringing up personal struggles that Elton had overcome decades ago and presenting them as if they somehow invalidated his entire legacy. The audience was now visibly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats as they watched their beloved host transform into something they didn't recognize. Elton's jaw tightened slightly, the first real crack in his professional facade. He leaned forward in his chair, his voice taking on a steelier edge as he attempted to redirect the conversation back to his music and upcoming tours. But Colbert wasn't interested in letting him off the hook. Instead, he interrupted Elton mid-sentence, something that would have been unthinkable in any other context, and launched into what could only be described as a prepared monologue designed to tear down everything the music legend had built. The cameras captured every micro-expression as Elton's face went through a range of emotions, from confusion to hurt to something approaching genuine anger. His hands, usually so expressive when he spoke about his music, clenched into fists on his lap. The audience had gone completely silent now, the usual energy of a late night show replaced by an oppressive tension that seemed to press down on everyone in the studio. Colbert brought up charitable work that Elton had done, but somehow managed to twist it into criticism, questioning motives and suggesting that philanthropic efforts were nothing more than publicity stunts. This was clearly a bridge too far for the legendary performer, who had spent millions of his own money and countless hours working to make the world a better place through his foundation and various causes. For the first time in the interview, Elton's voice rose above its usual measured tone. He challenged Colbert directly, asking what exactly the host was trying to achieve with this line of questioning. The words came out sharp and clear, cutting through the studio air like a blade. But instead of backing down or acknowledging that he had crossed a line, Colbert seemed to take this as permission to go even further. The host pulled out what appeared to be prepared notes, suggesting that this entire ambush had been planned well in advance. He began reading quotes that had been taken completely out of context from interviews Elton had given years earlier, presenting them in a way that made them sound damaging and controversial. Each quote was followed by a pointed question that seemed designed not to elicit information, but to embarrass and humiliate. Elton's breathing became visibly heavier as he listened to his own words being weaponized against him. His famous glasses caught the studio lights as he shook his head in disbelief, clearly struggling to understand how an appearance that was supposed to celebrate his farewell tour had turned into this kind of character assassination. The legendary composure that had carried him through decades of stardom was beginning to crack under the relentless assault. The audience was now completely silent, many of them looking around as if searching for someone to intervene and stop what was happening. But the cameras kept rolling, and Colbert kept pushing, seemingly oblivious to or uncaring about the damage he was inflicting, not just on his guest, but on his own reputation as a host. When Elton tried once again to steer the conversation toward his music, Colbert cut him off with a dismissive wave and launched into criticism of recent songs, calling them derivative and suggesting that the farewell tour was nothing more than a cash grab. The words hung in the air like poison, and you could see the exact moment when something fundamental shifted in Elton's demeanor. The music legend slowly removed his iconic glasses, setting them carefully on the small table beside his chair. His eyes, now unshielded, bore into Colbert with an intensity that made several audience members audibly gasp. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously quiet, the kind of calm that precedes a storm of epic proportions. He asked Colbert a simple question about whether this was really how he wanted to treat someone who had spent their entire life bringing joy to people through music. The question was delivered with such controlled fury that even Colbert seemed to hesitate for a moment. But whatever brief doubt he might have felt was quickly pushed aside as he prepared to deliver what would prove to be the final straw in this increasingly volatile situation. The host leaned back in his chair with what could only be described as a smirk, clearly pleased with himself for managing to get under the skin of someone as famously gracious as Elton John. He opened his mouth to deliver another cutting remark, completely unaware that he was about to push one of music's most beloved figures past the point of no return. The explosion that was coming would make everything that had happened so far look like a gentle warm-up, and the studio audience was about to witness something that would be talked about for years to come. What came out of Colbert's mouth next was so shocking that even the production crew behind the cameras froze in place. He suggested that Elton's entire career had been built on manufactured controversy, and that his music had never really mattered to anyone beyond creating spectacle. The words were delivered with such casual cruelty that they seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. That was the moment everything exploded. Elton John shot up from his chair so fast that it nearly toppled backward, his face normally so animated and expressive, had transformed into something none of the audience had ever seen before. The rage that had been building throughout the interview finally erupted like a volcano that had been dormant for too long. His voice, when it came, was a roar that filled every corner of the studio and beyond. He unleashed a torrent of words that cut through Colbert's smug facade like a hot knife through butter. Elton called out the host's complete lack of professionalism, his apparent need to tear down others to make himself feel important, and his utter failure to understand what music meant to millions of people around the world. Each word was delivered with the precision of someone who had spent decades mastering the art of performance. But this wasn't entertainment. This was raw, unfiltered fury. The audience sat in stunned silence as one of the most beloved figures in music history completely dismantled the host who had pushed him too far. Elton's voice cracked with emotion as he spoke about the countless fans whose lives had been touched by his music, the charities that had been supported through his work, and the sheer audacity of someone who spent their time mocking others' questioning the value of a lifetime spent creating art. Colbert, for the first time all evening, seemed to realize he had made a catastrophic mistake. The color drained from his face as he watched his guest transform from a gracious celebrity into an unstoppable force of righteous anger. He tried to interrupt, to somehow regain control of the situation. But Elton wasn't finished, not even close. The legendary performer pointed directly at Colbert, his fingers shaking with rage, and delivered a verbal assault that questioned everything about the host's character, his integrity, his right to sit in judgment of anyone, let alone someone who had dedicated their life to bringing joy to others. The words came so fast and with such intensity that the cameras struggled to keep up, switching frantically between Elton's furious face and Colbert's increasingly pale one. Security personnel began moving closer to the stage area, seemed uncertain about whether they should intervene or simply stand ready in case things escalated further. The production staff looked back and forth between their monitors and the live action, clearly unsure whether they should cut to commercial or let this unprecedented moment continue to unfold. Elton's voice rose even higher as he spoke about respect, about treating guests with basic human decency, and about the responsibility that comes with having a platform to reach millions of people. He called Colbert a disgrace to television, a bully hiding behind comedy, and someone who had clearly forgotten what it meant to be a decent human being. The host tried one more time to speak, perhaps to offer some kind of apology or explanation. But Elton cut him off with such force that Colbert actually recoiled in his chair. The music legend told him that he had lost the right to speak, that his behavior had been so appalling that anything he said now would only make things worse. Then came the moment that would be replayed countless times across social media and news programs. Elton turned away from Colbert completely, addressing the audience directly with a passion that reminded everyone why he had become such an icon in the first place. He spoke about the power of music to heal, to inspire, to bring people together, and how disappointing it was to see that message twisted by someone who clearly understood none of those things. The audience, who had been silent throughout the explosion, began to respond. First with scattered applause, then with cheers that grew louder and louder until the entire studio was on their feet. They weren't just applauding the performance. They were showing their support for someone who had been attacked unfairly and had stood up for himself with dignity and strength. Colbert sat frozen in his chair. His earlier smugness completely evaporated, replaced by what looked like genuine shock at how thoroughly he had been exposed and humiliated. The man who had spent the entire interview trying to tear down a legend had instead revealed himself to be exactly what Elton had accused him of being. Security finally stepped in, not to restrain Elton, but to escort him safely from the stage as the standing ovation continued. The legendary performer straightened his jacket, picked up his glasses, and walked toward the exit with his head held high, leaving behind a host who looked like he wished he could disappear entirely. The cameras captured every second as Elton John made his exit, the audience still cheering, while Stephen Colbert sat alone at his desk, the weight of his own actions finally settling on his shoulders. It was a moment that perfectly illustrated the difference between someone who had spent their life lifting others up and someone who had chosen to tear them down. What did you think of this incredible confrontation? Have you ever seen anything like this on television before? Make sure to subscribe for more unbelievable stories. And let me know in the comments which moment from this encounter shocked you the most.